Hello and welcome back. My name is Lon Schiffbauer, and today we are going to talk about global human resource management. So let's jump right in. Now, global human resource management is HR. HR. And you know what? HR is like many of the other topics we've been discussing. First, HR is HR, so it's both the same and very different when we look at it in terms of a global operation. And second, you could do a whole PhD dissertation in global human resource management. And so we're only going to touch upon a few of the aspects today. Nevertheless, it's pretty interesting stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and pick up my marker. You'd think I'd do that before I hit record, right? Okay, so here's the thing. Like I say, HR is HR, but there are some pretty significant nuances to consider when you're going global. So to talk about these, I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way. And that's the wrong button. We'll come back over here. Okay, so this is what HR is really made up of. When we look at human resource management right here, you're looking at planning and staffing, right? You're looking at recruiting and hiring, training and motivation, evaluation, compensation, terminating, and repositioning, redeployment, things like that. These are all the sub aspects that make up human resource management. Well, global human resource management is no different. We look at all the same things. However, they're very different as we go around the world. So, for example, let's look at recruiting and hiring, okay? Recruiting and hiring is done differently no matter where you go. In some countries, nepotism, where you're hiring just family and so forth, is actually really encouraged. And in some countries, nepotism is downright illegal. And in some countries, for example, South Korea here, companies like Samsung, they basically have this huge mega exam that you need to take just to interview for the job, right? So if we look at this report from USA Today, it says every 6 months, some 100,000 Koreans swarm campus test centers for a shot at Samsung glory. About 7,000 pass and 4,000 get jobs after this rigorous sitting that includes math, science, and reasoning. That's about 1 in 20 applicants. At Apple or Google, you'd get a shot with a glittering curricula vitae, a CV, and a spirited interview. But in Confucius, South Korea, exams are a far graver prerequisite, determining just about everything important in life. University admissions, corporate and government jobs, and even entrance into preschool can require strong test scores. Fail the test and you're potentially fail at life in the eyes of your family, a common reason for suicide in the nation, soaring numbers. I don't know their numbers in terms of suicide, so don't put numbers there. But that's real stuff. You have to do really well on what is essentially an SAT just to be able to interview for Samsung, okay? Then we have training and motivation. So employees all around the world are motivated by different things, right? So for example, if we take China, for instance, China is a very collectivist country, not an individual country. For more information about that, look at our video on culture. And so it's important that you don't call someone out from China individually in front of a group. That shames them, they'll lose face. So as it says here from ResearchGate, problems of productivity and retention of employees have been reported, which reflect on the ways foreign companies attempt to motivate Chinese employees, often relying on practices drawn from concepts which work in the West. So, for instance, in the West, we might have an all-team meeting, and the manager will say, "Hey, before we get our meeting, before we start our meeting, I'd like to do awards and recognitions. I'd like to call out Bob over here. Bob did a really good job. Here's a letter that a client sent. Hey, I'm going to read this letter in front of everyone. Bob did a wonderful job. He did this, he did that. Everybody, let's clap for Bob." Well, in the West, that might be just fine. In China, that is very, very, very awkward for the employee. I have seen this many times. I've actually done it a couple of times early in my career, and it did not go well. Okay, let's continue on. Now, oh, by the way, one more thing here. It says another thing that's different, Chinese employees felt that good wages were most important, followed by good working conditions and personal loyalty from the boss and organization. Interesting work was relatively unimportant, especially to older employees, and being in on things was not that important. So whereas in the West, we really like to be in on things and have interesting, compelling, challenging work, and the pay may or may not be that important. And loyalty, heck, in the West, loyalty doesn't even factor into it for the most part. We know that that's a thing of the past. It's quite different in China. Okay, now we'll continue on. Let's look at evaluating, all right, evaluating performance. How one gauges success. For example, in India, the long-held caste system can influence decision-making and employee evaluations as they pertain to promotions. So what do we mean by this? Well, in Personnel Today, there's this quote, "The nature of the workplace as a form of competitive environment means caste discrimination has the potential to play an insidious role in the day-to-day decision-making, in the recruitment process, in considering promotion and management." So, oftentimes in India, whether or not you're hired or promoted or how your evaluation is done depends on what caste you're a member of and what caste your evaluator is a member of. Okay. So, continuing on, compensation, pay, right? I mean, how can pay be different? No, pay is very different. Levels of compensation, as well as mix between pay and benefits, can differ greatly from country to country. For example, CEOs in Japan make substantially less than CEOs in the United States and other countries. So let's actually look at this, right? If we look at the US, base salary is more or less the same across the board, except Japan. Japan is much less. But when we look at annual incentive bonuses, right? And when we look at long-term incentives, stock, and so on and so forth, compensation is much higher than just about anywhere else. But take a look at Japan, and Japan, everything together, barely covers the base salary in, say, Germany, okay? So as it says here in The Atlantic, sometimes culture dictates business. The Washington Post's Ezra Klein's size. It's a reminder that the CEOs aren't just paid what the market will bear, they're paid what the culture will accept. Okay, so pay isn't just an economic decision, it's a cultural decision as well. These are just a few examples. Of course, you're going to be doing business all over the world. You need to figure out how each one of these countries addresses compensation. It's very different from country to country. All right, what about terminating, right? Firing, laying off, things like that. Well, some countries have very strong organized labor. For example, Sweden, they wield a great deal of power, the labor unions over there, far more than in, say, the United States where I am. So let's take a look at this. So the level of union membership in Sweden is 71%. There are three main union confederations, LO, TCO, and SACO, which are divided among occupational and educational lines in line with the traditional way in which Swedish employees are grouped, and there is considerable cooperation between them. There are some 3.5 million trade unionists in Sweden, although there are a number of non-employed members. So you don't even need to be a member. You don't even need to be employed to be a member of a union, particularly student and pensioners. The level of union organization is high. Figures from the official National Mediation Office put union density at 70% in 2011, right? Goes on, right? So let's take a look at that for a moment. If we look at union participation around the world, well, Finland actually has 74. Sweden, there's our Sweden, has 70%. And while, yes, it goes down, 35%, that is nothing to just sneeze at. The unions in parts of Europe and so forth have much more power than you may be used to if you are, say, in the United States or in China or in the Philippines or in India, okay? So you need to account for that. Now, by the way, just a quick little story. It mentions student unions, right? Well, this is a picture of me back when I was a student in France. Let's see. Lycée Flora Tristan. I never said the name of the school when I was there. It's in Noisy-le-Grand. I was a junior in high school in, let's see, 1982 to 1983, a trillion years ago. There I am right there. Well, we actually went on strike one time. I didn't know we were going on strike. I was this dumb kid American in a French high school. I did not understand what this was all about and what was going on. So I actually arrived to school on the day there was a strike. And this guy right here, he was like the coolest of the cool of the group. His name was Valentine. I mean, come on, Valentine, right? And he pulled me aside and explained to me what was going on. And of course, on parlait français, donc I did not understand a whole bunch very well. Nevertheless, it was a really interesting experience to be part of a student strike. It didn't make any sense to me. Okay, so now here's the thing, though. Those are just little nuances and so forth in global HR. What I'd like to do, though, is take a moment to really talk about staffing and planning, all right, especially staffing side. So staffing policies and approaches. If you are going to go global, you've got to figure out how to staff your organization, right? And there are actually three main flavors of staffing a global organization, each with different pros and cons. So let's talk about these. The first one is called the ethnocentric approach, all right? The ethnocentric approach says a company fills key management positions with parent company nationals. All right, what does that mean? Well, it means that let's say that you are a business in India, all right? You're a business in India and you start a business in the Philippines. All right, that means that you send people from India to the Philippines to staff that organization, especially the key management positions. You're not going to let those go to anybody, right? So you're sending your Indian employees and managers off to the Philippines to run the shop, okay? That's the ethnocentric approach. Now, what are the pros to this? There are plenty of pros. It fills the skills gaps, right? Your Indian managers, they have the skills that are missing in the Philippines, so you can fill skill gaps that way. You can transfer core competencies. If you're setting up shop in the Philippines, you really want to build up the core competencies of that satellite organization. And so this is a good way you can do that. It also helps maintain a unified corporate culture. So you have a corporate culture there in India, and when you transfer managers over to the Philippines, they take that corporate culture with them, and corporate culture comes down from the top to the bottom, so you're able to establish that there in your new site in the Philippines. There are cons, though. It produces resentment in the host country. So your Philippine employees are going to be like, what? Are we so incompetent that we can't run an organization? You have to send people from India over here to manage us. We know how to do this. Give us some training, give us some general oversight, and we'll take care of it. And so there's this kind of, condescending view of, they perceive condescending view from the parent company to the host, host country, yes, can lead to cultural myopia. Cultural myopia means, hey, there's only one way to do things, and that's our way. So as the Indian company is sending employees over to the Philippines with their corporate culture, that unified corporate culture, that presumes that there's only one way to do things, and that is our way. And so you're not really going to be able to learn and grow from the host country culture, because you kind of have it in your head that we do things right anyway, it doesn't matter. Now, there are cases in which an ethnocentric approach makes really good sense. All right, here's a report. Let's see, UK essays. Let's come over here. Typical example of an ethnocentric approach company are Japanese firms such as Panasonic, Sony, and Hitachi. Now, having lived in Japan as an expat, we'll talk about that, for a couple of years, I understand this because, well, Japan, the way they do things, the language, their culture, and so forth, they probably fit into an ethnocentric approach very well. Let's continue on. In these industries, the staffing approach for subsidiaries in Thailand, Vietnam, and India adopted ethnocentric system due to a lack of competency. We talked about that. And the needs for corporate communication. You got to be able to speak Japanese, right? The Japanese really like to keep things homogeneous in that way. Most of the customers in India and Thailand are Japanese manufacturers. All right, so they're working with Japanese manufacturers in these other countries. So the ability, therefore, an expat with Japanese language ability to communicate with customers' parent company in Japan is still vital. Okay. So that's one reason why these Japanese companies often follow an ethnocentric approach. However, there are many cases in which an ethnocentric approach has failed utterly. All right. One famous case study was Walmart in Germany. All right. Walmart tried to set up shop in Germany. Walmart has been successful in moving into every country in which it has tried to do business, with two exceptions. Germany, and I believe South Korea. I believe they have failed to move into Germany and South Korea. Let's talk about Germany. So Walmart's experience in Germany, where it lost hundreds of millions of dollars since 1998, has become sort of a template for how not to expand in a country. Some of Walmart's problems stem from hubris, a uniquely powerful American enterprise trying to impose its values around the world. So, first of all, how were they trying to impose their values around the world and in so doing demonstrate hubris? Well, they sent American managers over to Germany to say, hey, we know how to run this. I got news for you. Germany has some pretty darn competent managers. Pretty darn competent managers. And so for America to send managers to Germany to say, we've got this, we'll take care of it, there's a lack of core competencies and skill sets, well, that's pretty insulting. Second is, these American managers were like, in many cases, living in England, right? What the heck, right? You're managing a group in Germany from America, but you're living in England because, well, they speak English. Okay, that's a whole nother thing as well. And then the whole American value, the thing about Walmart is really about cheap. Both cheap in terms of price and cheap in terms of the item you're buying, right? It's just affordable. The idea is, yeah, okay, you might throw it away in 2 years, but it was really, really inexpensive, and so you'll buy a new one. Germans don't go in for this. Germans really like quality. They like something to be durable. They don't really go in for cheap, right? So everything just worked against them. But a main reason is because of the inappropriate use of an ethnocentric approach. Okay. Now let's talk about a polycentric approach. This is when a company requires that host country nationals manage subsidiaries while parent company nationals occupy key positions at corporate headquarters. All right, so what does that mean? It means, all right, you're that company in India and you've set up a subsidiary or a group, or you've expanded into the Philippines. All right, your Indian managers at the higher level will still kind of oversee that expansion, that satellite office, but they're going to stay in India. The managers who are actually managing things in the Philippines are Filipino employees, right? They are the local bosses, they are the local managers, and they're going to run things over there in the Philippines because they know their employees, they speak Tagalog, they know their people, they know how to get things done, they know the industry over there, they know the government, they can take care of it, right? And you upper senior managers in India, just stay in India and we'll send a report to you now and again. Okay, that's the polycentric approach. Some great pros here. Reduces the risk of cultural myopia. Since you have managers in the Philippines now who are kind of running the show, then the Philippine sort of best known methods and best practices and sort of the cultural insights can work their way into the company. And that's a good thing. Less expensive to implement than the ethnocentric approach. You're not sending your Indian managers to go live in the Philippines. They're staying in India and you're hiring folks in the Philippines. This is the least expensive option, okay? There are some cons though. Produces resentment if local managers have low career mobility. Now, this is important. I have seen this a lot. Yes, you've hired managers in the Philippines, and so they're running the show, they're senior, they know what they're doing. But in many cases, that might be as high as their career can go. They can't go any higher than managing the satellite office of this Indian company. Now, in the next approach that we look at, there are actually options for them, career options. But in this one, once you're the manager of that, subsidiary in the Philippines, that's as high as your career can go. You're not going anywhere else. It also isolates foreign subsidiaries from the corporate office, the headquarters. Oh my gosh, I have seen this so often. you know, the idea is if you're not seen, you're not heard, right? Whenever things are going down, they're going down at the corporate headquarters. That's when you're putting in FaceTime, you're rubbing shoulders with the powers that be, you're seen, you're noticed, you're recognized. And so really, if you want to build a career, you almost need to be at corporate headquarters in many cases. Whereas these subsidiaries that are off in other parts of the country, let alone international, they're almost forgotten. They're out there doing their thing. They're meeting their numbers. They're hitting their quotas, and we don't hear much from them. Therefore, everything must be going fine. You feel isolated. You feel very, very isolated. Trust me, when I worked for Intel Corporation, I saw this a lot. Although Intel Corporation did not follow the polycentric approach. Intel Corporation followed the geocentric approach, our final one. Geocentric is a company simply seeks the best way to fill key positions across the entire organization, regardless of nationality. All right. So what that means is if you're an international company like Intel, you're going to fill positions all over the world with people from all over the world. Okay. For example, I've often said, and this is true, if I could pick you up and drop you in the middle of any Intel site around the world, you would have a hard time figuring out which country you were in. So I worked at Intel. If you go to Intel and say California, you'll see Americans, but you'll see British, you will see Indian, you will see Chinese, you will see Israeli. You'll see every nationality wandering around the hall. And even when you go to the cafeteria, you'll see food from all over the world. Where are you? Go to a site in India or China or in Malaysia, where I did an expat assignment, and it's the same thing. You see all these nationalities wandering around the halls doing the work because this company has followed a geocentric approach. All right, what are the pros? Well, it uses human resources really well because you're finding the best talent and finding it where it is most needed. So you're able to connect the best talent where it's most needed very well, very efficiently, so you can solve problems very, very easily, very quickly. Helps build a strong culture. And it's not myopic at all, right? All these people, all these nationalities are bringing different ingredients to a large global corporate culture. And since everybody's moving all around the world all the time, it's very, very stable. Helps build informal management networks. Oh, yeah. If you look at my LinkedIn, I have network connections with people all over the world because of my time working with that company. However, there are some cons. One is immigration laws can be really, really, really complicated. I mean, I could tell you stories, right? Here in the U.S., we have H-1B visas. So if you want to come here to the U.S. to work, you have to get that visa, but there's only a certain number of visas available, and they're not available for every profession, just certain professions, and it depends on what administration is in place and how they interpret, blah, blah. You get what I'm saying, right? And in other cases, you can only do a 3-month expat assignment. We'll talk about that in a moment, versus you can be there for years. Every country has its own rules when it comes to other nationalities coming over here to work because you're taking a job. So you need to really demonstrate that you're bringing a skill set that you cannot find locally. And that gets extraordinarily complicated. It's also massively expensive. I mean, moving employees from all around the world to places all around the world and setting them up in apartments and so forth, really expensive. So you got to make sure that you need this approach to make that work and that you can afford it. Now, the thing about the geocentric approach is it's all about expats, an expatriate, okay? Now, when I was a kid living in England, my mother would say, hey, you know what? You see that pub over there? That's where all the expats hang out. And I'm like, expats? And she says, expatriates. Well, I'm 13 years old, right? Give me a break. In my ear, I'm hearing expatriate, as in patriotic. And I thought, what kind of person would be patriotic to their country? No. It's patriot, right? In terms of where you are working, right? So an expat is somebody from one country working in another. So as it says here, here we go. A citizen of one country working abroad in another. So this is a group I worked with at Intel quite a bit. This was the Intel HR group in India. ES stands for Employee Services, right? So you see all these Indians, right? Great folks. That's Nina right there. She's fantabulous. All these folks. Well, you got this one dude right there. Well, now, he doesn't look Indian. He's not. He's Israeli, right? That's Ronan. And Ronan was an expat working with that group in India. And by the way, a lot of these Indian folks, yes, this is in India, but they did expat assignments in the US in some cases. I think Nina did a short expat assignment. So you move folks all around. And I did an expat assignment in Malaysia. I should have put one of those pictures in there. That would have made sense. Okay. Now, expat is all part of this geocentric approach, and it works well. However, there are some significant risks to running an organization on this whole idea of building the foundation on expat assignments. There are some really big risks. The attrition rate among expat managers is nearly twice that of domestic managers. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if you have 100 managers in your native country, all right, maybe 10 of them will leave in a year. Whereas if you have 100 expats, 20 of them will leave. It's the attrition rate, the number of employees that quit, nearly double. Now, when it comes to U.S. expats, common reason U.S. expat managers fail and return home early include inability for the spouse to adjust. Now, this is big. So let's say, all right, I'm going to say Linda. All right. Linda is an American employee who is sent off to India to do an expat assignment. All right. So Linda's heading off, and Linda has Mark as her husband, right? So Linda and Mark head off to India, and Linda's working and so forth. Now, here's the thing. I already told you, and let's say it's with Intel, that if you go to any site in the world, any Intel campus, it looks like any other Intel campus. And so Linda is overworking at an Intel campus, and it looks like Intel. It feels like Intel. She's working with people from all over the world. She's doing a job that she knows very well. That's why she was sent over there to do it. So Linda, for 10 hours out of the day, 10 or 12, we'll talk about that, 10 or 12 hours a day, she hasn't left home. She's still at home. Intel is her home. Trust me, Intel is her home. We love our Intel. Okay, so she's fine. Mark, on the other hand, that poor sod, he's sitting around in an Indian apartment. And maybe he does some work remotely, right? He does some Zoom meetings and so forth. But he is in a foreign country, a foreign world, a foreign culture. Linda is not in a foreign culture. She's still in Intel. Whereas Mark is thrust into India. What happens if a pipe breaks and he has a water leak? What do? You don't know what you do in India. When you go shopping, how do you pay for things? What do you do when you buy a drink off the street and they take a shopping bag and fill it with some sort of liquid, tie the shopping bag, and stick a straw in it? What do you drink from the shopping bag? Is that what you do? It is so confusing and disorientating for the spouse that it creates a lot of stress, So while Linda's just off, doing her thing in Intel culture, Mark, he's really struggling. Okay, now, inability for the manager to adjust. Sometimes it is tough for the manager to adjust, right? Maybe Linda can't always adjust. Manager's personal and emotional maturity. All right, this is paramount. For more about culture shock, go back to the video on culture, all right, on global culture and so forth. What is culture? It's tough. Culture shock is going to happen. Culture shock is going to happen. The question is not, is it going to happen? It is, how are you going to respond? And it takes a great deal of emotional maturity and emotional intelligence to be able to, handle the stress of corporate culture and to overcome it. And if the manager isn't ready, that can be catastrophic. And then finally, inability to cope with the larger overseas responsibility. Listen, it's expensive to send Linda and her husband Mark over to India. To India, right? And so it's expensive. We're gonna work her to death, right? Seriously. In the US, she might have been working 55-hour weeks. If you're with Intel, 55, 60-hour weeks. Trust me, in India, she's going to be putting in 80-hour weeks because the company wants their money's worth and she's there to solve a problem. Okay? All right. So you got to train your expats. Oh my gosh, you need to train your expats. You need to give them cultural training. Develop an appreciation for the host country's culture, including history, politics, economics, religion, and social business practices. You need to train them. You need to give some basic language training. Now, that doesn't mean that an expat needs to be fluent in the language then when they go off there. You take India, for example. Well, the official language for business in India is English. And furthermore, there's like dozens and dozens of languages in India. So what are you going to train them on? Well, you want to figure out what is the predominant language or languages of the region in which you will be working. So, for example, Intel has a large presence in Bangalore. That's where I would work when I would visit India. And so you want to figure out, well, what's the main language in Bangalore, and learn some phrases. Just learn some thank you and some hellos and some general phrases, just to show the host country that you're trying and that you take your role as a guest seriously. And then please provide practical training to everyone, not just Linda, who you're sending over there, but to her husband, Mark. The practical training is helping expat families ease into the day-to-day life in the host country, establishing routines, connecting with communities, and navigating life in this new country. For those of you who have lived in foreign countries, you understand what I'm saying. You cannot overstate the importance of understanding how day-to-day life is done in that country. Day-to-day life is like, it's invisible. We are so used to day-to-day life wherever we live that we don't even think about it. But you go someplace else where it's all completely different and it just pulls the rug out from under your feet. So you need to provide practical training to your expats and their families. Okay? And there you are, folks. Great job, as always. I hope you found this helpful. We still have a few more to do, so don't go anywhere. We'll be talking more about legal systems and monetary systems and so forth. So stick around. And until we talk again, have a fantastic day.